What's up, everyone? Hope you're having a good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Maybe chime in and tell me what time it is in your part of the world, because everyone's in a different time zone here. So, hope everyone's doing well. They just restarted doing street construction right outside my window. I don't know if you can hear it or not. I hope it's not too disruptive. Hey, John, 8:30, is that AM or PM? Are you West Coast or are you somewhere in Europe? Uh, hey, what's up? Nashville's on, cool. AM, okay, so West Coast, right on. Michael, good to see you. Thanks for hanging. Can you guys hear the jackhammer right outside the window? I hope not. It's kind of coming on and off. They're not using it at the moment. They were a minute ago. There it is. All right, so we have some folks. Awesome. Morning, Steven. Good to see you. Thanks for hanging. So, hey, Brian. Good morning, Paul. 4:30. Yeah, cool. Sound and vision's fine. Awesome. Thank you. Can't hear the hammer. Okay, good. It's pretty loud over here where I'm sitting. Hopefully it won't interfere with anything. They're running it at the moment. Brian, what's up? Cool. Yeah, there's a bunch of people on here. Thanks everyone for chiming in. So this will probably go for maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours. Obviously, you guys are welcome to come in and out at whatever is convenient for you. If it's your first time at one of these tonality group classes, this is basically a sort of like practice session. I mean, I'm going to talk some, but it's a little different than open office hours. If you have questions, please feel free to chime in and ask. I'm happy to take little breaks from what I'm doing. Hey, good morning, Mark. Drop any questions you have in the chat box, and I will try and get to them and answer them, especially if they're specific to the 13 flat 9 into practice. But basically, I just want to show how I get this stuff off the page and explore it, because everything in this PDF and all the PDFs this month is very extensive if you've looked through it already. Everything in there is just, some of the early concepts are kind of straight out of my teacher Stefan's brain, and it was just me trying to figure out how to get them onto the guitar. And then pretty much everything else is just dreaming up different ways of being creative with triads. And it's great to have like a big picture vision, but we have to take baby steps to get there. And you don't have to do everything the exact same way I do. I'm not doing this to show you how you should be practicing. I'm just doing it to kind of help give a little direction if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by everything. We don't need everything in that PDF to play music. In fact, what I'm going to do, since we have 2 tonality classes every month, I decided I'm going to start doing the first tonality class, which is today, focused entirely on the first 1 to 2 sections of the PDF. So that's the must know, right? The piano voicings and the primary tension note. And then if we have time, which I imagine we will, we'll probably get into the digging deeper, which is kind of the stuff that I began playing around with very near the beginning. Not at the very, very beginning, but it's the stuff that really kind of, I think, is the next best step to start running with. Next tonality class, we'll dig into all the stuff after that. Okay, but today, that's where we're going to focus. That's where I'm going to focus with my practice after I plug my computer in, because I forgot to and I don't want to run out of batteries. Cool. All right, so I'm just going to jump in. Mark kind of asked about this a bit. Was it yesterday? Hey, John, thanks for hanging. Mark asked a question yesterday about how to practice, and I kind of went into a pretty extensive breakdown of how I like to do it, but I just want to continue on with that, kind of start over, but talk more at length about it and to show it. Ironically enough, I was just watching a video this morning that someone put up on YouTube. Jens Larson, I don't know if you guys follow him on YouTube or not, but he and I are friends on Facebook, and so I saw his, I don't know if it's his newest video. He's putting out videos constantly. He must hire somebody out to help him. I don't know how he makes so many, but it was specifically on Bill Evans and on quotes from Bill Evans about learning to understand the process of how to grow as a musician, jazz musician. And you guys, if you've read any of my PDFs or watched any of my videos, you know I'm kind of a Bill Evans nut, musically as well as just the process. And so I have a bunch of Bill Evans quotes on my mind right now. And again, it's all about coming back to the fundamentals, keeping things simple, working on one thing at a time, and just hitting it over the head constantly and getting to the point where it's able to sink down into our subconscious, and then we can control it without too much thought, which allows us to really play music with it. I'm a terrible piano player, as well as what I like to do is to continue building layers of complexity on top of it, because if we understand something on a subconscious level, then we should be able to add one tiny little inch of steel frame above it. If we try and add that steel frame above it before we're really comfortable, it can sometimes lead us astray. So that's kind of what I want to get into today is, the steps I take to push myself to get these ideas into my ears. That's got to be number one, into my soul and my heart, into my mind, into my fingers, into my eyes. Stephen, may not be the right place for this question, but any advice on systematic approach to gaining better command of shell voicings? Triads are becoming automatic, but need to concentrate more on shells. Yeah, I can mix that in a little bit with today. I don't really put it into the PDFs primarily because it's such a quote-unquote simple concept. Simple is not always easy, and just because something's simple doesn't mean that we don't need to learn it and that everybody already knows it. That's not going to be the case with anything simple. Even Bill Evans at one point in his life didn't know shell voicings. I always have to remind myself things like that. Like, no matter how down I'm getting on myself for certain elements that are missing, I have to remind myself, like, I'll pick someone that, whose music I really admire, and I'll remind myself where I am today, where you guys are today. You are better musicians than fill in the blank of your favorite hero than Mr. X was at some point in their life. I mean, Bill Evans was not born playing the way he was, when he was recording with Miles. Like, that's just not how it works. There are very, very, very rare cases where young kids are just sort of innately gifted. But Bill, Schofield, a lot of the big name guys, if you listen to them in interviews or if you get to hang out with them, will tell you, like, I was not a talented kid. Bill talks about that in Universal Mind, that he was not naturally talented, that everything he did, he had to organize and build. So maybe shell voicings. Let's start with the ear first, because I always want to start with the ear for my own sake, and I just think it's a good idea. And then I'll try and include that in the big picture of things. So the very first thing that I always do with these new tonalities, anytime I'm working on a new one or going back to an old one, because I do go back and like to repolish them from time to time, like an old pair of shoes that has to be dusted and polished. The first thing I always like to do is the piano voicings, because that's where all this started for me, was sitting at the piano actually listening to these 6-note voicings, and then getting them onto the guitar. So if you have the PDF pulled up on your screen or printed up, that's great. You can have it nearby. We're going to focus on the first 1 to 2 sections. We'll do some of the more advanced stuff in the next tonality class. I think it's in 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks. So the first thing that I like to do, I think yesterday I mentioned that if you're very new with us, you might want to just take one of these shapes and move it chromatically around the fretboard. me, I usually kind of skip that step at this point. Not that I didn't used to skip it. Not that I used to skip it. I like to jump straight for the circle of fifths. If that's too advanced for you, then just go with chromatic. If you have your guitar, you can play along with me while we're doing this. So your C, F, E flat, E flat, E flat. The trick with this, I find, is not simply to play the right keys and the right notes, but to try and make each one sound good, like a full, rich sound. All the notes are ringing. Right? We improvise, we play the way we practice. So if I'm doing this kind of half-assed, that's how it's going to come across when I'm playing. There's E, there's A, D, G. Right, with G, we have open strings. We can also move it up an octave. And that brings us back to the beginning. For me, that's not the end. That's just the first cycle. I usually go through this until it's like boring me. Boredom is a good sign to me. Boredom means that it's starting to burrow down into my subconscious. G, there's the octave again. Back to C. See, that one sounded bad, so I'm going to stick with it for a minute. This should be, again, our goal is to try and get stuff into the subconscious. So if we're actively thinking, if we're like trying, if it's taking the exertion of mental energy to do this, that's okay. It's just recognize that just means that you're still thinking your way through it, which means you still need to hit this over and over and over. And it doesn't have to be just this position, right? We want to do this with all of our positions. So if you practice it with another position, it's also going to help reinforce the circle of fifths, finding your root notes, which will allow you to then go back and do it with the other position, and it should actually help. They're going to kind of build on each other. There's E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B, E, A. With E and A, I like to use my open fifth and sixth strings for the root notes. D, G. So now back at C, but I'm going to keep going. If you want to do this stuff with a metronome, you can do it with a metronome. The biggest thing I think is, I was just emailing with someone about this. Time is super important, but the tonal pitch version of time is the quality of sound. Like, we want to be able to convey things in time, which a metronome can be helpful for. My metronome is on my phone and on my computer. I guess I could put my phone on. In fact, yeah, I'm going to do that. But the other thing that you really want to pay attention to is the quality of sound. I hear people all the time talk about, like, everybody needs to work on time. It's so true, but everybody needs to work on quality of sound also. And by quality of sound, I mean sort of the integrity of your sound, the roundness of it, the richness, the fullness. Saxophone players, I didn't realize this until I went back to school a handful of years ago. But saxophone players practice these things called long tones, and it's about their breath. It's about training themselves to breathe sort of in, what's the word I'm looking for? It's learning to control their breath so that when their breath interacts with the saxophone, they get a full, rich sound. It's not always about playing long notes. They call them long tones, but they can be relatively short sometimes. But it's about the idea that the moment the note begins, it's like this fat tone, and then it gets cut off. So there's no there's no wavering. They can add tremolo in after the fact, but before they can add tremolo, They just have to have like a solid sound. It's harder to work on that on guitar because it has nothing to do with breath. It's kind of that idea that you might hear people talk about of that tone is all in the hands and the fingers, right? So that's a difficult thing to work on, but it has a lot to do with just the way we respect our sound and think about it. Hopefully you guys can hear this. It's on max volume. I'll maybe put it closer to the computer. So back through, moving through it a second time. Notice I'm talking to you. I'm able to keep this going. I'm having to kind of go back and forth a little bit, but that's what we're looking for, is the ability to multitask. That means that it's down below that conscious level, right? It's moving deeper into our subconscious, which is super important, right? Okay, so that's kind of like a big first step that I like to do. I might break these apart. I might not always play them just like this, right? I'm looking to create musical situations. So that's melody, bass, middle voices. Right, I've been through this like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times already, but it's the same chord, but now I'm kind of just messing around with how I execute it. That was melody, bass, chord. Melody, bass, chord. I tend to prefer hitting the melody note first, but just because I find it more musical. But sometimes we maybe need to hit the root first, so I might practice. Just root chord, almost stride piano-esque. But these voicings, while it only takes one line on the page for me to show you the voicings that I'm talking about, there's a lot that could be done with them, right? What if we... right? Melody, and then I'm sort of like arpeggiating the whole voicing. In fact, I'm going to do melody, jump to the bottom, run it up like a cartoon staircase, and then I'm going to repeat the melody, and then I'm going to move to the next key. Ooh, and here's another. I'm just making it little steps harder each time. I'm going to see if I can hold the melody out and make it sound less staccato than the rest of the chord. Right? I'm just trying to find anything I can do, any little challenge, I think of these as games or challenges. I just make up a rule built around whatever voicings or melodies I'm working on. And it's like an obstacle course. It's like just going out to a soccer field with friends and some cones and a ball and like, let's just make up a game. And then we just have to follow the rules of the game. Not only does it help reinforce the voicings, it gives me lots of options as to how to execute them. And it forces me to learn to exist inside of and to navigate rules and restrictions and games and form and ideas, so that way when I'm improvising, if a thought comes to me, if I hear the bass player do something, if I want to head in a certain direction, I'm kind of used to thinking on my feet. I'm not a big believer in the concept that you can't think and play at the same time. I think that you can't play this stuff if you're still concerned with the basic voicings, but if you know the voicings or the fundamentals in general, and if you kind of train yourself to move quickly and think on your feet, sometimes you don't have to think, but when you need to think, that stuff can present itself and become part of the picture. To me, our humanity, our mind and our intellect is part of it as much as our heart and our ears and our fingers. Like, it's all part of who we are. So I don't really want to deny the existence of any part of myself in my music. For me, if music is a human body, like the sound version of a human body, like I want a strong muscular frame, right? I want that sort of Buddha-like emotional presence, but I want a strong intellect there as well. I want someone that's intelligent, that is thoughtful, and that can work its way with its intellect through situations. So little things like this. What if I make it even harder? I'm going to slide from the one melody note to the next. Okay, that's pretty challenging. I mean, we're just taking one voicing, but that's like a workout. I mean, that's like a warm-up right there. I see some comments that I missed. Stephen, don't let me forget about the shell voicings. I do want to come back to that. Mark, if you don't put thumb over, would you leave out root or try to bar first three strings? Yeah, it can be a little tough if you're trying to play those staccato arpeggios to get that. I guess it's possible. It depends on the tempo you're playing to just jump the pointer finger. Otherwise, you can, if you're just trying to play it as a voicing, that works. But then, I'm kind of palming my pick and playing with my fingers, which is a great way to get, if you're not already comfortable doing that. Different players do this differently. I've seen Rosenwinkel. I don't know how he does it, but he kind of hides his pick in between his his pointer and middle fingers, or is it his middle and ring? I don't know. He somehow gets it in between them and is able to hold on to it while he's playing, which I've tried and it just doesn't work for me. I do this. Can you guys see that? It's like, you have to find your own way that's comfortable, but it's basically I'm sticking the pick in between, right here, in between these two knuckles. And I use a relatively small pick, and it just kind of, can you see it? It just kind of sits in there, and I'm able to do basic finger picking. I can't do that much with my middle finger because it's already bent, but in general, I try and move from the lowest knuckle, just from my days in classical music. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm using all 5 fingers. There you go, Mark. I just switched to thumbless. Okay, so that's another thing I might do. Just one voicing and just randomly moving it around. I was like, in my mind, obviously you guys couldn't hear it. In my mind, I was hearing just like a really up-tempo, swinging, burning hot rhythm section playing a modal tune. Obviously you guys couldn't hear that, but I was playing, quote unquote, out against this band that I was hearing in my head. No relationship to whatever key they were playing in because I was not in it. I was constantly moving through. Let's put that where you at, volume? Are you not playing? Like even with this, even though I'm not improvising, I'm trying to find little intervallic and rhythmic themes, like holding on to ideas. So that was a different voicing. Very quickly, I switched back to this one because I've been talking about this one for so long. Again, I'm kind of trying to show all these different things because I know it just is one line on that PDF of showing these voicings. It's only 3 voicings, but the depth to which you can take those 3 voicings is completely up to you. You don't have to do it the way I do it. In fact, I'd recommend that, take the ideas I'm talking about and showing and try them, but then go find ways that work for you with this stuff. I'm talking more about big picture ideas and sound, and then just showing how I like to play with them. But, at the end of the day, if it doesn't work for you, you have to find what does work for you. So I'll do that for all 3 of the voicings. Right? I usually skip the chromatic stuff and go straight to the circle of fifths. And then I'll sometimes do like just random stuff like what I was just doing. Not always that up tempo. I just wanted to burn for a minute because I was hearing that in my mind. The next thing, and we talked about this yesterday, is I like to voice lead, to practice voice leading with these things. So we haven't even talked about 5-1 movement yet. Right now we're just talking about the tonality. So I like to, maybe I'll start on G. So I'm going to move through the circle of fifths using these 3 voicings, focused on the top, or the top string, the top voice, and trying to move it the smallest distance possible, which means if I can keep it on the same note and just change the voicing, I will. But sometimes that's going to happen, sometimes that's not going to happen. So if that's G, 13 flat 9, the next key is C, and the closest note now here's F. It's a rootless F. Here's B flat. Here's E flat. A flat. D flat. G flat, F sharp. Okay. B. Just drops the E down an octave. Here's A. Here's D. G. There was some like trying to make it kind of sound musical and like connecting. Right, I don't have to connect it, but it's just a little thing to make music with these shapes. That sounds nice too. So I'll take stuff like that through the circle of fifths. If any of you guys out there have gone through, is it Triads? It's one of the boot camp programs. I think it's Triads level 2. I think that's the one it's in. I talk about this idea that I love to use. It's kind of based on some ideas in this Tchaikovsky book that I am always going back to on harmony. Also from my time studying and hanging out with Brad Shepik, he used to do this, and he mentioned that Ben Monder does this, and that's to think in different directions. If you've been through, I believe it's Triads level 2, you've tried this, it can be quite challenging. This is even a more challenging version of it because we're going to do this, but we're going to do it with these voicings, not basic triads. So the idea is that we're going to think the key that we're moving in, we're going to move down in half steps, like down chromatically in half steps, which is relatively simple, right? C, B, B flat, A, B flat. Not that difficult. But then we're going to invert our voicings and our inversions to make sure that we're moving up the fretboard. Okay, so here's, like if I like to start on G for stuff like this. So here's G, 13 flat 9. So the next chord's going to be G flat. But I need to find a G flat version of it that is higher pitched. Okay, now I have to do F. An F inversion that's higher pitched than this. So I can't move down, I have to move up. Here's E. Here's E flat. Or did I just play for E? So E flat. It's got to be there. I have to drop this down. Where's D at? D. D flat. C. B. B flat. A. I have to, every time I get too high pitched, I have to drop back down so I can keep going. A flat. G. F sharp. F. E. E flat. Right? I mean, we can just loop this over and over and over. It's a huge brain teaser. Not only does it force you to know all 3 inversions really well, it forces you to be able to find them in all 12 keys all over the fretboard while you're kind of thinking about all these changing keys and moving in different directions. It's very challenging. Let's see, I missed some comments here. Mark, I think I was commenting on yours a minute ago. That's where I left off, I believe, if you don't put your thumb over. Michael, question about quadratonic runs going through circle of fifths. Do you play the run on the chord at hand or from the chord you're going to? For example, starting on B flat 13 flat 9, going to E flat 13 flat 9. Okay, I think I see what you're asking about. John, also go the other way on the circle of fifths. Yeah, totally. And it doesn't even have to be the circle of fifths. I mean, you can move this stuff in minor thirds, right, or major thirds, or whatever cycle you feel like doing. I just find the circle of fifths kind of the most effective because it sort of imitates a lot of the movement we tend to see in standards. And it's just a classic, traditional, time-tested cycle. But you can also move, instead of going down in fifths, you can move up in fifths or down in fourths. It's kind of the same thing. But yeah, so if we're doing that, we'd have something like G, right to, what would it be, D? So yeah, this is how rarely I think through this direction of the cycle. G, D, A. Maybe I'll start up higher pitched. Let's start on C. C, G, D, A, E, B. So what's interesting about this is that it's not resolving a 5 to a 1 the way our ear is expecting dominance to move. So it's like a very unresolved sound, which can be really hit. If we resolve down in fifths through the circle of fifths, then every one of our dominants is resolving to the next chord. So it's like a constant falling, but every time we fall, it's like, oh, okay, this feels natural. The other direction, it's going to feel it's going to leave us feeling much more uneasy. So yeah, that's a lot of how I kind of approach these basic voicings before I get into the primary quadratonic, before I get into anything else. Stephen Rad, awesome. Scott, sound is getting garbled. Is it just you? Sounds fine. Brian, sounds fine to him. Stephen sounds good. Yeah, sorry, I don't know, maybe try reloading the page. I did listen back, Scott, to the open office hours for a few minutes of it after it was done yesterday, and there was a little bit of some kind of quirky audio stuff going on. I don't know if it's my computer, or if it's YouTube. My guess is that it's probably, I mean, I filmed so many videos, and the videos themselves don't have audio issues, so I'm guessing it has to do with the live broadcast. Hopefully it's not terrible. Oh, awesome. Perfect. Happy to hear that, Scott. Okay, so let's kind of step back from that for a minute and simplify this down a little bit. I think it was Steven. Somebody was asking about working on the shell voicings. I forget exactly who. So these are important. I mean, shells, like, you can't get away from knowing your shells. We don't talk about them too much. We mainly use them in examples and in voicings. But there's really primarily, this isn't entirely true, I'm going to lie a little bit for a minute, but there's really just kind of two shell voicings that I feel I need to know for any tonality. That's root 5. Root 5 meaning my root note is on the 5th string. There's the C note, 3rd fret, 5th string. There's the 3rd and the 7th. 3, 2, 3. Right, that's my root 5 shell voicing. And then I use root 6 shell voicing. Okay. Root is on the 6th string, 8th fret. There's the C note. The other two notes I keep on the same string set as down here. So still the 3rd and 4th string. 8th and 9th fret. So the middle two, the higher pitched 2 strings stay in the middle of the fretboard, string wise. And the lower note, the root, changes between the 5th and the 6th. I just like to do it that way because it helps make voice leading shell voicings a little bit easier to do when you're moving through a chord progression. If the 3rd and the 7th are always on those same 2 strings, then they will just naturally voice lead with each other pretty nicely. Yeah, John, Freddie Green is certainly a great example to check out. In terms of getting used to them for tonality work, like before we even get to chord progressions, a couple of quick things that you could do. Circle of fifths, just like we were talking about, right? Like start off, just pick one, like root 5. So here's C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B, E, A, D, Okay, that was 1 octave through the circle of fifths. Now that's terrible voice leading, which is okay. Not everything has to be like perfect, but it's worth trying this stuff with slightly better voice leading. So maybe take C, F. Right, that's why this sounds better and works better. Because those two notes, those two voices are just moving a half step, and the lower voice is moving up a fourth. Sometimes we'll have to jump, like at some point when we get to paint ourselves into a corner, but just moving it through the circle of fifths. And then the other thing I would say is that's worth it is kind of experimenting around with, not that I do too much inversion stuff with shell voicings. Generally, I don't want to say generally because I don't know, things just happen sometimes, but stuff like being able to see the fifth. So here's C7, root 5, 1, 3, flat 7. Sometimes I'll put the fifth down there. Right, root 5. So shell voicings can be a good way to start thinking about like the bass player role, which if we're playing solo guitar or duo, comping for someone, not that you guys probably have heard if you've listened to me, like I don't constantly walk bass lines while I'm playing. Occasionally it'll happen. It's just not my aesthetic preference, but it's good to be able to think about and understand the perspective of a bass player and how they're going to fit into the picture. So C, root position C, C with the fifth in the root, or in the bass, I should say. Sorry. And then being able to do that up on the root 6 shell. Right, it's going to start to look a lot like, I don't play these bar chords very often, but C7 bar chord. 8, 10, 8, 9, 8, 8. We're just playing the bottom 4 notes of that, but we're kind of breaking it apart. And then the last thing I might work with for this particular tonality, this dominant with a flat 9, is kind of the diminished variation on this, which is starting to get into more advanced realms. But if we take the root note and we move it up a half step, which are flat 9, we basically end up with the diminished shapes, the diminished voicings. Right, which are good to know. Right, that was like a quote unquote diminished run, but if I did it over C13 flat 9, you can hear a 5-1 movement. If the bass player is playing C down to F and you play something like what I just did, you're still going to hear the same thing. These are, I think of this as kind of left hand of a dominant chord. They're diminished voicings, 4, 5, 3. It's kind of like the bottom 3 voices, fully diminished 7 chord. There's actually a lot of potential with stuff like that, even though it's sort of basic. I think of them as shell voicings. There's a lot of potential there, especially when it starts to get into the overlap between the way I like to think in our melodic triad approach and some of the Barry Harris stuff. There's some very cool overlap there. Okay, cool. I hope that helps. If you have other questions about it, hit me up and let me know either here or just in an email or in the underground or something. Because they are important, shell voicings. Let's maybe take shell voicings and use it to move to into the single note ideas. So everything that I do once I get beyond the basic 3 voicings, the pianistic voicings of taking these 6 note ideas and getting them on the fretboard, pretty much everything I do after that is organized around one of those 2 shell voicing shapes, either root 5 or root 6. just about everything I do. So here's C7, root 5. Now our melodic triad for this tonality is A major. So one of the first things I do when I'm working on a new tonality is just to try and find an A major triad sort of arpeggio, no tension notes, just the arpeggio that kind of sits on top of this shape. It's like the piano player, like I want to be able to see both things at the same time. If any of you guys have been through the boot camp programs, tried specifically, you might notice that this is not one of the 3 positions that's in those. I'm still aware of the 3 positions, though. This is sort of an in-between position, but I'm still looking at those top 2 notes. I just kind of naturally see them here, and then here, I'm looking at that shape, and then it kind of moves back. So I'm just kind of dancing between 2 different shapes. You can practice it as its own shape. There's nothing wrong with that. I just like to minimize to have the fewest amount of things to think about as possible. So I'm trying to see the shape and the triad shape kind of at the same time. Okay, and then moving through the circle fifths. So I'm becoming aware that it's starting on the 13 of the chord, moving through the 3rd. There's the flat 9, right? These are the chord tones harmonically. But I'm looking at the shape of the triad. That's what I'm kind of consciously paying attention to, that geometry of this triad shape. And you might notice that I'm resolving the triad, even though it has, like this was a G flat 7. I'm playing an, what am I playing, an E flat triad? Like at this point, I'm not even thinking about what the triad is because it doesn't matter. I'm just looking at the geometry and the relationship spatially because I've already put the thought in. I know it's a T6. So I believe that's E flat. Yeah, there's the root note of the triad. So I'm resolving an E flat major triad to B major 7. So we're not really playing 5-1 melodically speaking, but it still functions that way. It works that way in the ear. And especially even more so once we add our tension note in. So that's going to be the next step. But before I get to that, well, yeah, let's just go ahead and add that in. You can hear it. It's like you get tension, dominant, resolution tonic. Okay. So, but the goal is to kind of see it over this shell. Right, that quick little jump. I'm not playing around inside a scale kind of looking for something that's going to sound cool. I'm just looking at the triad shape and I just have like complete trust. I've spent so much time with them. I know they take care of everything else. My connection is unstable. Please wait while we try reconnecting. Did I lose you guys? I just got an error message on my screen, but it looks like I'm still moving. So if you guys want to chime in and just let me know that you're still with me. I'm back. Okay, cool. Yeah, I got an error message saying that something was interrupted. So it's kind of annoying. I have complete trust in the triad. I know, lost you there. Okay. Yeah, so I'll kind of start back wherever that was. I don't remember 100%, and hopefully things are just kind of fixed. Keep chiming in every few moments and just let me know the status on stuff, because on my end it looks like it's working again. But it's like a trust fall for me. Like, once you do the work to just get the triads behind you, you can just fall backwards and they'll just catch you. And the more you trust them and the more you kind of leap into their arms, so to speak, I find the better everything it just all works. I have no idea what I'm going to play before it comes out. I just have like a basic framework of notes based on the melodic triad and the primary tension note. And my goal at the beginning is to develop my ear to hear the tension note and to be able to see that shape on top of the shell voicing. Looks like we just in that last minute or so lost a handful of people, so I'm wondering if I'm still frozen. So if you're watching me and you can hear me talking right now, chime in and let me know if I'm still frozen or if I'm working now. We're back? Okay, thank you, Brian. Yeah, streaming technology is amazing, but I think we still have a long way to go with it. Right, that was a B major triad moving to G major 7, but it sounds so romantic and perfect and 5/1-ish. Yeah. So maybe I'll just take some basic stuff. Let's just take this shape, and this is kind of still relying on shell voicings. I'm going to play the shell voicing. And then resolve it. And I'm going to move that through the circle of fifths. C major. There's C7. Every time I land on a major 1, because we're following the circle of fifths, that major 1 becomes a dominant, and then I move it through the quadratonic run and resolve to the tonic, the new tonic. There's F major. Here's an F7, root 5 shell. There's B flat, so here's B flat 7. There's G major tension flat 2. I could slow down and think about what the triad is that I'm playing for each of these. Like, it would only take me about a second to know that answer, but I'm actually not consciously aware of which triad I'm playing when I'm playing it. I'm looking at the shell voicing. I'm looking at the geometry of how that triad sits on top of the shell. And then I'm just moving. Once I get the shell, I don't even really need to look at the fretboard anymore because my fingers just kind of know where those notes are from doing this kind of stuff. So that was an ascending run. Let's flip it around and let's descend, and let's maybe move to root 6. So here's the C7, root 6 shell voicing, 8th fret, nothing on the 5th string, 8, 9. So first thing first, gotta find the triad. Sometimes I play this. This is one of our 3 positions. Anyone who's been through the boot camp programs will recognize that triad shape. Sometimes I'll play that way. Other times I kind of like to move it, spread it underneath the shell. So here, instead of playing the 12th fret 5th string, I drop down to the 7th fret 4th string. But again, this is like just what works for me personally based on habits. So it might not function the same way for you. You might want to learn to view it in a slightly different way. It almost sounds, at this point when we're just doing shell triad run, almost sounds a little alien. Like they almost don't sound like the same sound, which is why that primary tension note is so important. Not only does it create melodic intrigue and drama and movement and tension, but it also, because it's giving us the flat 7 of our dominant chord of our left hand, it also kind of like glues the 2 sounds together so that we start to get the same vibe from both of them. Right. Most people who were not in our group and had not worked through the materials we have would not hear this and guess that they were hearing a major triad. Because we're kind of masking it, and that extra note, that tension flat 2, glues the 2 entities together, so they start to sound like a singular unit, and hides the fact that we're just playing that triad. So let's play through the circle of fifths, just with like a quadratonic run. There's the resolution. Here's F7, F13 flat 9. To B flat 13 flat 9. E. minutes ago, you were asking about which quadratonic I'm playing over when I'm moving through the circle of fifths. So right now, I'm moving through the circle of fifths, but I'm resolving to a major tonic and then changing that major tonic into the next dominant. So obviously, I'm outlining the dominant and then resolving a tonic. If I were doing this, sort of asking Michael's question, which is kind of based on, if I understand correctly, not resolving to a tonic, but just moving through through cycling 13 flat nines, I would just play over whichever one I'm thinking of at the moment. So to go back to C13 flat 9, here's C13 flat 9. That's the quadratonic for that C13 flat 9. Now here's F. I'm playing a variation on a sort of a diminished shape variation on the shell voicing kind of a thing. It's like 5th, flat 7th, 3rd. So it's almost like the spelling bee. I mean, you can do it however you want to do it, but for me right now, what I'm doing is stating the chord, playing the quadratonic, moving on. You could do chord, quadratonic, chord, and then move on. You could do quadratonic, play the chord, resolve the chord. You can put it in any order you want. I mean, when we listen to music, there's no organization to how chords and melody have to function. So the more ways you try it, the easier they all get and the more musical they all get. You could do it all without even playing the chord, right? Let's see if I can keep up with this. I haven't even finished my coffee yet for the day, but I'm going to try and just improvise the quadratonics over the 13 flat 9, moving through the circle of fifths, but without playing any chords, just quadratonic ideas. So here's C 13 flat 9. Here's F. Here's B flat. Here's E flat. A flat. Right? Can you hear the chords moving? What was I just playing? A flat. Here's D flat. I'm not doing full position runs anymore. I'm kind of doing smaller, little bite-sized bits of it. Or am I at D flat? Right? Here's E. That time I connected them chromatically, just because why not? Shit, what key am I in? Oh, that was the full octaves. That was back to C. So however you feel like doing it, it's not necessarily about doing it the right way. It's just about knowing your fundamentals, picking a way to do it, and then just doing it. Like, force yourself to follow the rule. Freedom comes from discipline. They're not mutually exclusive. Discipline and restriction don't prevent freedom. They create greater levels of freedom. Because if you can't keep up with the individual rule, then obviously you're allowed to play whatever you want to play, but are you going to be able to? I can't. I think it was a Navy SEAL that I heard say that comment, and he was talking about like physical training and mental training, but it applies to music too, that freedom is found in discipline. I mean, think about our 6 strings, right? They're not loose, they're not floppy, they're not free in the sense of being able to do whatever they want. If they were, when we strummed our instrument, we would just get terrible, floppy, metal-hitting metal noises. The reason they're able to sing and produce this like gorgeous sound for us is because we tighten them up, we stretch them out, we pull them. We don't over-pull them, right? We're not gonna, like, if you keep going, they'll break. But you have to find that balance between keeping it taut, but giving it just enough room that it can move. So when I'm doing stuff like this, I don't want to say you have to do it a specific way, because to me, the student-teacher sort of relationship is not that I should show you everything. It's that I'm there to just kind of point out what I think the fundamentals are, and then just kind of let you go explore with them and experiment with them. If I took away the process of exploration and discovery away from you, it would become like the most boring thing ever. Like you lose out on all the light bulb moments, on all the, you're stuck in that plateau, you're stuck, you're fighting, and all of a sudden you realize how to get to the next one. Like those are the things that produce the growth. So you get the basic stuff down, come up with a rule, whatever that rule might be, and just go for it. Just pound your head against the wall until you realize that there's no wall in front of you anymore. That's a really interesting metaphor that I've heard from some spiritual schools that I think about a lot for music, which is this idea that like you're walking down your path, whatever that path might be, and all of a sudden you come upon a wall, and on that wall, in that wall is a door, and you have to want to get to the other side of the wall to open the door. Like if you don't care about getting to the other side of the wall, then you're not going to struggle to get the door open, but the door's locked, right? It's just like this big deadbolt gate. Like, so you're pounding on it, you're trying to kick it down, do anything you can to get it down, to get it open, to let you through. And nobody can do that for you. And the oddity and the sort of weird paradigm shift of the kind of spiritual teaching and how it applies to us is that it won't open unless you struggle and fight to get it to open. But at a certain point, it will open if you just pound on it enough. And once it opens and you step through it and you turn around and look behind you, you're going to realize the door was open the whole time. Like there wasn't even a wall. Like it was just an illusion in your mind that there was like an obstacle that you thought was there that you had to get through. The only way to realize it never existed is to fight your way through it. And then once you're through it, you can turn around and realize there was nothing blocking you from it. I mean, we're talking about triads. Like this is as simple as music gets. Like if you take a music theory course in college or read a book, the first page or two is on this stuff. We're basically taking the first 2 pages of a music textbook or the first 1 or 2 classes of a music theory course and expanding it out into a lifetime adventure of exploration and discovery, because everything is possible with them. If you want to learn melodic minor scales and modes and all that other advanced stuff, that's great too. I've certainly been through that ringer. I haven't found any of them to be as successful for me as triads have been for developing my ear, learning to play melodically, learning to really control harmony and understand it. It's pretty strange when you think about what we're attempting to do in the study group, to take the tiniest little, stupidest, most elementary first step and just stretch it out so that it becomes so big that we can get in and work on all those tiny little details. John, Jordan, you had done a video last week of 13 flat 9 triad pairs, but it was chords. Can you play some single note runs? If we have a little bit of time at the end, maybe I'll get into that, John. But today we have 2 tonality classes every month, and because the PDF is so extensive, I want to use the first tonality class of each month to focus on the fundamental stuff, like the must-know section and maybe some of the digging deeper section. So that's primarily what I want to focus on today, because it's important to me that everybody remembers, no matter how advanced everything gets, it all has to start with the basics and just being able to make music with the basics. It's not enough to intellectually understand them. We have to get our ears wrapped around them, and we have to get it into our vocabulary so that we're creating music. So I want to primarily focus on that today. If you want to, if I have time at the end, I'll mention that briefly. But also feel free, John, because I don't want to make you feel like I'm totally shutting you down. There is going to be a whole tonality class where I am going to focus on those things. And you can, of course, come and hang at the open office hours, and that's just free range. Like whatever people want to ask and talk about, we can talk about. So those are kind of the primary ways that I like to work on the voicings, the shell, the pianistic voicings, the shell voicings, and the primary quadratonic. Before we move on from any of that, I also do want to talk about one other thing that I like to do a lot, which I don't talk about in the PDFs, and I don't really ask anyone else to do, because it's usually not most people's favorite things, but that's singing. I like to sing these quadratonics because talk about a way to personalize it and force it to become internal. I missed some comments before I make a fool out of myself by singing. Let me check back in with what you guys are talking about. Scott, for a dominant 5 of some target, do you ever think in terms of the target? So for D13 flat 9, B major, do you ever think third of the target? Oh, I see what you're saying. Not so much. I mean, it's kind of yes and no. As far as the tonalities go, when I'm studying a tonality, I'm generally just thinking that tonality, what it is, what it's made of, how it functions as kind of a standalone. You know, it's like taking a snapshot of music in time and just putting that under the microscope and trying to get to know it. So in that regard, I generally let the resolution chord just kind of be the natural resolution of like, here we are, we're swimming around inside this sound, and now we move here. I do think there's something to be said about learning to think in new ways. So by all means, like I don't want anyone, I've been kind of talking about this a lot recently. I don't want anyone to feel like they just have to do it the way I do it. Like this is just the way that things kind of make sense to me and work for me, and that allow me to move through a practice session in a sort of logical, strategic way so that I can increase my vocabulary and my comfort level and grow. But it could be an interesting thing to experiment with, to think of the third, like if I'm thinking, what key were you talking about? Yeah, D13 flat 9, so the resolution to G major, and the triad is B, which is the third of G major. I mean, you end up getting the same sound, so it really boils down to me to understanding the best sort of neuromuscular pathway that you want to develop. Like we can both achieve that sound using those two different ways of thinking. One is thinking about the tonality and basing it on that. The other is thinking about G major and basing on that. For me, the end goal of working on a tonality is to not have to think about what the triad is or the T6 relationship. Like I know that stuff. I mean, it's like memorized up here. I actually used to have like, what do you call it? Like the note cards, you know, like 13 flat 9, you flip it over, T6, tension flat 2. Like I like sat and memorized this stuff. But now, like I've been talking about, it's just about the shape of it. So if I'm playing, you know, maybe we're playing over, I'll Remember April, right? And maybe there's an intro or an outro vamp just kind of hanging on that G major sound. Right, there's the D13 flat 9. I'm not wearing shoes and my pedal, sometimes I have a hard time getting it right on, so it's throwing me off because there's a little piece of time that shouldn't be in there. But whether you're thinking of that B in relationship to the G chord or in relationship to the D, they kind of both work. And at a certain point, for me, it's important to just learn to see them kind of visually as all related. So if I'm playing G, I'm not thinking about this in relation to G in terms of it being built from the third, but I'm well aware that my 13 flat 9 dominant chord right? Like those shapes are related to each other in my mind, but the jackhammer's back on. I hope it's not interfering on your guys' end. Hey, Miguel, great to see you. Thanks for joining. So where did I leave off? So it's kind of a little bit of both, but the bigger picture is just, do you know what the sound is going to be? And are you able to just see it on the fretboard? right? That's regardless of which path you take to get it on the fretboard. That's the end goal. And then really the end goal is then to just be able to play around with it creatively. I shouldn't be playing that tension note yet. That's a different tension note that is later in the booklet, but it does sound cool. You know, it's very similar, really. Honestly, it's very similar to just being able to see this, the 1 and the 5, the shell voicings. Are you seeing the 1 as an extension of the 5? Or are you seeing the 5 as an extension of the 1? I don't know. Are you thinking about the root movement and adding the 3rd and 7th above it? Or are you thinking about the whole chord and then breaking the chord apart to get the root and 5? So yeah, whatever works to help organize it in your mind. I never personally approached it the way you're asking about, though. If that's helpful on any level, I don't know. All right, let's keep moving. Did I miss any other comments? I guess not, Scott. Oh yeah, cool. You're welcome. So that's basically everything from the must know, and that in and of itself is enough to get in and make very pretty music. If you know your basic shell voicings, if you know your pianistic voicings, and if you know your primary quadratonic, your primary tension note, if you have that for a couple of tonalities, we could be just playing tunes with it. Are you going to sound like Bill Evans, like Charlie Parker? No, for sure not. You're not going to sound like me either, hopefully, just because I'm using the same techniques. The goal is for you guys to take these ideas and internalize them and take them personally. Find the ability to use those melodic tension notes to express an emotion that you feel so that you can convey something that's yours. Not everybody who uses a C major scale is going to end up sounding the same. In fact, I think we'd all agree that none of them sound the same. So just because we're all using sort of quadratonics or tension notes or melodic triads in general doesn't mean we're going to create the same end result. Is this a bad tune to do? Is there no 13 flat 9s in this? Did you hear how romantic that was? Like just like jumps off the page once you get to know the sound of this tonality. Doesn't work as organically resolving to minor. And here's the reason why. I didn't really talk about this in the video, in the study guide, but the reason why is that the melodic do of this triad, it's a note in the triad and it happens to be the melodic do. This is body and soul, so 5-1 at the end of the form is B flat 7 back to E flat minor. Well, if we're playing a B flat 7 and we want to make it a 13 flat 9, we're going to apply a G major triad, that's T6. This is where knowing the theory and the T's and all that stuff comes into play, really. Not so much when I'm actually playing, that's just shapes and sounds. But being able to think our way through a tune, right? It's a G major triad. So if we're moving to E flat minor, and the triad we're using to create that harmonic movement, that melodic movement, is G natural major. Well, a G natural, if you think of the key we're headed towards, Scott, to kind of go back to your question a little bit, if we hear G natural over E flat, that's obviously a major chord, right? The natural 13 of a dominant is the major third of the next key of the tonic that we're headed towards. So we can still get away with using a 13 flat 9 dominant tonality to move to minor, but we're basically implying and foreshadowing that we're about to head to a major key and then kind of switching over and heading to minor instead. Right, can you hear that? So it's a little bit more jarring than if we resolved to major. That's kind of why I recommend that you mess around with this resolving to major keys at the beginning, because it's easier on the ear. So let's see, where did I leave off? This is not the 13 flat 9, but it is related. It's a diminished chord, E diminished. Now here we're moving to, if I just play it, I know it's going to come out right, but I'm trying to analyze it before I play it, and now I'm getting freaked out that I'm going to say the wrong one. We're moving to D major. I was forgetting. Yeah, D major, and then later it goes to the D minor. So we're moving to D major, so now I'm going to use that A13 flat 9. Let's see, where did I leave off? Can you guys hear it? That really lush, romantic, beautiful. Now we're minor. So we can use the G13 flat 9 because we're headed to C major. taxing so much. I mean, this is how I think my way through a new tune if I'm working on a particular tonality. Like I'm just trying to shove this 13 flat 9 anywhere that I can find an opening that will fit it, which is primarily dominant chords moving to major chords. The rest of the tune, I'm just going to play whatever I'm going to play. Once we work through a handful of tonalities, then we can use other tonalities in those places, which I am doing some. But I'm just looking for any opening in the form where there's a 5 chord moving to a 1 chord, and I'm just cramming either the pianistic voicing or the primary quadratonic into place. And it's kind of part ear training, part brain training, part finger training, part fretboard mapping. Here's a little cadenza, right? I'm just going to sit on the 5 chord for a minute. Maybe I'll go back to the 2 chord. So just lots of little baby steps, right? Just getting to know the voicings of the circle of fifths, getting to know the shell voicings if we need to with the circle of fifths, getting to know the primary quadratonic and the primary tension note with the circle of fifths, and then picking a tune and just shoving it into place. If it's not the most musical sounding stuff, then we want to be aware of that, because the whole point is to get to music quickly, not to get too caught up on the theory. The theory is important, but the theory is really just there to help us get the new sounds into our ears and onto the fretboard. And then we just have to get moving with it and creating and playing music. That's all the must know. We can, if you have a couple of tonalities, you can play over tunes and have this type of command of the harmony and melody. Very colorful stuff, simple, but not necessarily easy, and it certainly won't come across as elementary. Like, it comes across as highly mature, I think. I like my playing when I'm only using these elementary levels concepts of our system. I personally like my playing more like this than I liked it when I was using all sorts of advanced this and running this scale and outlining these chords, and those are great skills to develop, but I'd much rather sit and listen to my playing with something like this versus this sort of chaotic, undisciplined, unfocused, obscured music that I used to play. By obscured, I just mean that I was trying so hard to be clever. I was trying so hard to get all these really cool ideas in there that I overlooked the fact that it very often just didn't sound that great. It might have come across as advanced, but just because something sounds advanced doesn't mean that it's like musical in a really deep sense. So I find this stuff far more musical and in a very seasoned and mature way, which is what I love about our system, is that step one in terms of implementation immediately gets us into real sounding phrases and harmony, lush pianistic harmony. And then because everything's built with the fundamentals, then we can grow. So we still have a little bit of time. Let's grow into digging deeper. I believe the first thing in digging deeper is the 4-note voicings. So there's different ways to get 4-note voicings, but 4-note voicings are kind of like status quo for guitar pedagogy. Most people break into them with the drop 2 stuff where you take a 1, 3, 5, 7 and just invert it all equally. Cool stuff to work on. I just don't use it that much. I don't find the musicality of it to be that intriguing to me. So the first thing that I like to do for coming up with a particular type of 4-note voicing is just to prioritize the melodic triad and to take 1 note from the left hand of the piano, right? Keep all 3 notes of the triad and use 1 note from down here. And that gives us 4 notes, and those 4 notes imply a very lush pianistic chord. So we're going to invert the triad. I'm not going to go too deep into the theory here because it's in the PDF. I just want to, in case anyone hasn't read through this section yet, we're just going to invert the triad, whatever triad we're working on, and then that extra note is always going to go underneath it. So same thing I like to do with this is pick one of these and move it through the circle of fifths. So let's do 1, 2, 2, 2. A major triad over B flat. Right? It's a pretty common thing. You'll see A/B flat. A over B flat. So there's C, there's F. In case anyone's wondering, what I'm thinking about and looking at is this root 5 shell voicing. I know that the third of that shell voicing, my pointer finger, is the bottom note of that triad. And I know that the root note, if I just drop down a whole step, is that extra 4th note. So I'm not really thinking A over B flat. I'm thinking about this shell. And I'm just kind of able to see both of those shapes at the same time. Okay. Even just doing something like this can be really helpful, just playing back and forth. Root 5 shell, 4-note voicing. And then there's F. Same thing, F7 shell, D over E flat, but again, just look at the shape of it. And then resolving to the tonic to B flat major. Just moving through the circle fifths now. This is not a pattern that I practice all the time. This is another one of those little silly games, those restrictions that I place on myself. I just came up, I do like to go back and forth with this shell and this voicing. So I just applied a rhythm to it. And then resolved it, which I don't do every time. Okay. At some point, I like to be able to just think about the voicing and not need to play the shell. I can still look at it in my my mind, but here's C, here's F, here's B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, so it's G flat, B, E, A, D, G, C. Right, we have to be able to just grab it. That extra step of playing the shell voicing is just another little baby step. I'm always looking for little baby steps. How can I take 1 inch and move forward? So there's a nice voicing, right? That's all we really need. We can apply that right into body and soul. Played the A flat root note and then jumped straight for this. I was in my mind, I was kind of viewing the A flat root 5 shell and then just resolved it. Same voicing. So I would just go through any of those new 4-note voicings. Sometimes I'll take one and move through the circle of fifths. Other times I'll just kind of go on string sets and say, okay, here's A major. There's the B flat. Here's another A major, just inverting it up. There's the B flat. Without the thumb, with the thumb. Okay. A major, B flat. So I might pick one and move it through the circle of fifths. I might just practice playing all 3 up and back like that. Sometimes I'll just pick one, like let's do this one, and I'll just apply it to a 2-5-1, and I'll just try to voice lead. So this is C13 flat 9, so the 2 chord is G minor. So that's a 2-5-1-6. Here's D flat. Oh, I'm sorry, not D flat, D7. Melody, root, inner voices. This is not a full pianistic voicing, but I'm playing it the way I did like an hour and a half ago when we started this. Why? Because I wanted to hear that melody note first, and I couldn't quite get to the whole voicing. So I just decided in that moment, without thinking about it, here's our voicing. There's the root note. So just breaking it apart. Once I can voice lead it, then I'm going to just start to mess around and try and make something musical with it. That was D flat 7. D flat 7, why D flat 7? Was the tritone sub of G minor. I was kind of thinking of G minor. You could say I was thinking of it as a dominant making the tritone sub, or you could just think about creating a different type of movement I'm still heading to C7. I'm just using a half step resolution to get there. I hear that romantic. So yeah, those are kind of the three sort of generic ways that I would practice any kind of chord voicing, but in this case, these 4-note voicings. So one is to take it and move it through the circle of fifths. One is to just practice all of them kind of as inversions of each other. And then one is to kind of pick one and just practice voice leading with it. See if I can get into it. If it's a 5 chord, I'm usually going to plug it into a 2-5-1 or a 2-5-1-6. And then right into a tune. Right? Any of these, this one. This is an interesting one because that 4th note is like a major 7th below it. It's a big jump down to that note. So how would that work? Let's try that. If I were voice leading a 2-5-1. That bass note, that lowest voice, is a little bit of a strange movement. It doesn't sound bad. It doesn't sound wrong. But it's not quite right in my ear either, because I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I mean, I have a book on harmony from Tchaikovsky. Like I like the old school sound, which I think is why I'm such a Bill Evans nut, because he so clearly spent so much time in classical music. Not that I don't like non-classically trained musicians, but there's something about classical harmony, the sort of perfection of it. So what I might do is I might think, well, how can I resolve that B flat note to a strong note for F major, but something that's a little bit smoother in terms of voice leading, right? I just went the B flat down to A, so I'm just thinking of this. You could say it's an A minor, like a minor 3 chord, but I'm just thinking of it as F major, but inverted. This is where inversions come into play. This is why the whole drop 2 inversion chords, I think, are a little premature for most of us, because most of us can't think about our individual voices. So we use inversions as a means to try and sort of approximate complexity, like to put it in Bill Evans terms. We're trying to make it sound more complicated than it really is or needs to be. Inversions, and this is something I used to talk about a lot with Peter Bernstein. He was kind of the first guy that called me out on this. You know, when we invert something, if we're playing like that's I actually really love this voicing. This half step in the middle is great. But there's no actual new harmonic information when we go from here to here. We tend to think that we're moving because we're changing to a new inversion, we're changing to a new part of the fretboard, but there's actually no movement happening. There's no chord movement happening. You could argue that there's a little bit of melodic movement happening, but they're all the same notes. It's like I'm saying something and then I take 2 steps over and I say the exact same thing. Or I say a sentence on, right? It's the same words, I'm just jumbling them up. Which is why I kind of prefer not jumping straight for the drop 2 inversions, because we get the sensation that we're creating movement, but there's really not much, if any, movement being expressed. And so those inversions can be really helpful, like being able to think about F major with A in the root is super helpful, but what's the purpose of that chord? Like, when is it best to be used? Like, that's kind of an weird thing. It's not like a bass player. You're likely not going to hear Paul Chambers do that on any recordings. But right now there's like a reason, like if we arrange this out for a horn section, you have a horn player, you know, a bari sax or a tenor sax playing, or a bass player. You're going to hear bass players play lines like that way more than you can make the whole thing chromatic. You could pedal out that E note on top. Well, we just walk down and we can all hear that sort of cadential movement. This is one of our 4-note voicings. I'm just kind of pointing out how I would explore voice leading it. Like, how does it actually want to move? I hear that B flat very clearly wanting to resolve down to A. Doesn't mean it's the only way it can move. That's just F major triad, an open triad. You can add the 7 in also, but the B flat can go up to C. It's not as strong to my ear. There's something about that half step. Passion and craving and desire in music generally takes place inside of half step movement. Right? That's why the 4 wants so desperately to come down to the 3. That's why we call it a leading tone. The 7 wants to go up to the root. It's like there's something about half steps in music that, like, there's so much gravity to them. So when I hear this, it works, it's okay. Not as good as this, though. Half step. Right, that's where a lot of the passion and the romanticism of this tonality happens because of that sound, that note. So I would practice a lot of stuff like that with those 4-note voicings, and then we'll kind of wrap up with the 3-note voicings. And if I have time to go back, forget who it was that was asking about the triad pairs. If I have time, I'll try and squeeze that in at the very end. I think it was John. Done a video last week, 13 flat 9 triad pairs, but it was chords. Yeah. If I have the last minute or two, I'll try and at least explain what was happening with that. So where did I just talk about? The 3-note quadratonic voicings. These are super important for breaking down. Like, basically what we're doing with the harmonies, we're starting with the big picture piano voicings, like those 6-note voicings. We just trimmed them down into 4-note voicings, so much more manageable for guitar, much easier to think about in terms of voice leading. But we can continue breaking it down to 3-note voicings. We can break down to 2-note voicings. Quadratonics are great for that because they get us right to the color, right to the sweet spot notes. So the 3-note voicings, the theory is already in the PDF, so I'm not going to explain it. But again, I'm just going to show you how I would work on it. Shell voicing. That's my first thing. I'm going to grab the shell voicing. Here's the root 6, C7. I'm just going to do that as many times as I need to until I can see these shapes, the geometric patterns overlapping. I might just do it with one of them. I might do two back and forth. That with a tritone on top of it. I mean, that's just, I love that. So now I'm just playing the root note instead of the whole shell. Just playing the root note. That's okay too. There's a nice resolution. Let's try that. So if I find something I like the sound of, circle of fifths. We're back to the octave. I would do that on loop a handful of times. But it's a way of, you know, when I show you something like this, when I write this out, I think I put it here in the PDF. Like, you can think of it like a chord scale. That's okay. It can be a useful kind of trick to be able to run through a chord scale like that. I talked a minute ago with Body and Soul about just being able to sit on the 5 chord at the end for like an extended cadenza. So if I'm playing right, that was like a full expression, a full statement of the chord scale, taking the quadratonic run and just harmonizing all the way down. And that's a cool trick to have, but there's only so many times you can play that before it starts to sound formulaic. But if you think of each one of these, or even groups of 2 of them, as like a standalone thing, so that was this one, and the next one, I just played 2 of them, and then resolved 5-1. You don't even need to. You could do this with one of them. Like, just take any individual one of these. There it is. That's just dirty. Flat 7, flat 9, 13. We're getting into low interval limits that technically, if I were going to like write an arrangement, I probably would not use this in an arrangement because that interval is too small and too low pitched. But man, it does sound cool. It just, the reason for not wanting to do that is it starts to get muddy and it starts to obscure like this. versus the harmony is much more digestible. We can actually like hear the individual notes. For that, it's the same thing, it's just an octave higher. This, it's just, that starts to sound like one almost like out of tune thing, and it sounds cool, but it obscures the clarity of the harmony itself. If I play it a little softer, you can hear it a little better because it must have something to do with like the harmonic overtone series, I'm not sure. What a great 5-1 voice leading. So you can see we're starting to get significantly more advanced in terms of the ideas and the execution in the digging deeper section. We haven't even talked about the secondary tension note yet. You know, if I played this stuff on a gig, even with piano players, but with other musicians listening, no one's going to think that I'm just faking it with basic major triads. Like, it sounds very advanced, but it's still relatively easy for us in the sense that it's all just a triad with one extra note added at this point. I am taking extra baby steps, right? I'm getting rid of that second to top note. I'm moving through the inversions, but we don't need a full run to take advantage of these. And very often the less stuff we use in each phrase, each moment, the more mature and seasoned and musical it's going to come across. It's very much a game of less is more, of learning to not overplay things. I know it's like goes against our instinct to want to chase after the most advanced sounding stuff, but you know, just look at someone like Jim Hall or Bill Frisell or even Miles or Chet Baker. You know, I mean, these are musical voices that, in my opinion, I would very often much rather listen to those guys than, you know, I don't want to name any particular names, but guys that can burn like crazy. They're so much fun to listen to, especially for the first 5 or 10 minutes. But at a certain point, it kind of becomes like how long can I handle? You know, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. Like, how long can I handle this intensity, this constant flow of this barrage of sound? It's fun. It's amazing, and I love a lot of those players. But there's a certain level of respect and admiration I have for guys that can do all that and say all that with like 1 or 2 notes. Like, there's a level of artistry where it's, you know, it kind of surpasses virtuosity. And then if you can have both, where you can move seamlessly between them, that's a game changer to me. So again, just kind of pointing out, it's cool to run chord scales, quadratonic runs, but the baby steps we want to take, the practices we want to be doing, should be how do we take one little piece of something and get it into our playing, be able to see it quickly, access it quickly, and voice lead through it for tunes. I'm not going to talk about the secondary tension note, but it would be the same process for learning to use it as well as for the pentatonic scale. The last thing I'll point out, John was asking about the triad pairs as chords. So there's a handful of different ways to do that, and a couple of them are in the PDF already. But if you're just talking about actual triad pairs, you know, I might just mess around again based on the shell voicing. And then resolve to a 1 chord. I think you maybe were talking about the video where it was the quadratonic pair. I think that might be what you were referring to, where I was playing the dyads, the 2-note ideas. That was just taking John. Yeah, okay, cool. So that was a lot of baby steps. I mean, like I can explain to you the baby steps that I took to reach that riff, that idea. But just be aware that it's just an A major triad over C7. It all comes from these piano voicings at the ground level. That's the foundation for building a skyscraper. That's the big hole in the earth filled with concrete and steel. You're asking about like floor, 117 way up in the air. So it's going to take a lot of stories to build up to that, but it all starts from this. So the idea is we get the A major triad, then we add tension flat 2, based on that hierarchy of harmonic importance. Then the next baby step was our melodic triad bebop scale, right? That gives us the triad pair. That adds one tension note in between every triad note. And that gives us our triad pair. That tension triad is E flat. That's where the triad pair comes from. Then we have to get used to that, be able to voice lead and mess around with the triad pairs. Then I added a 7th note into this because that's a 6-note bebop scale. 2 triads, 6 notes. Then I added an extra note, a 7th note, and that 7th note I added as a tension note against the tension triad. So we have A major over here, it's a melodic triad. Then we came up with this E flat triad from the melodic triad bebop scale. Then I added a 4th note to it, so we actually have a quadratonic now, tension quadratonic. And that quadratonic is E flat, tension sharp 2. So we can take the A major triad, tension flat 2, that's our primary quadratonic, and now we have this tension quadratonic. Now we can also play around with E flat tension sharp 2. So I just went from A to E flat back to A. Simple phrases. I'm not playing a ton of notes. Here's A, tension flat 2. E flat tension sharp 2. It's going to look like a major and a minor triad. The sharp 2 is the same as the minor third. Back to A. Back to E flat. Back to A. Back to E flat. Back to A. Back to E flat. A. Okay. That would be the next baby step, and that's a challenging baby step because now we have a lot of plates spinning. We have tension notes, we have resolution points, we have this triad, melodic triad, we have the tension triad. We have a lot to keep track of here. So that should take you a good while. And then where that video came from was I decided to do the 3-note voicings, the 3-note quadratonic voicings, but now I'm switching between 2 different quadratonics. So instead of this, right, the primary quadratonic, the 3-note voicings from that, now we also have 3-note voicings for the E flat tension sharp 2 quadratonic. I need to spend some more time on these ones. This is a new quadratonic for me. So what I was doing was just like triad pairs of doing A, E flat, A, E flat, A, E flat, A, E flat. I was doing the same kind of idea, but with quadratonic voices. A, E flat, A, E flat, A, E flat. Staying on E flat for this to A. So let's start that back over here. C. 5-1. next baby step was just those 3-note quadratonic voicings, but moving back and forth between the melodic triad and the tension triad, or the melodic triad, primary quadratonic, and our tension quadratonic. And then what I did was I just got rid of the bottom note from each of those because it was starting to sound a little too dense to me. There's like too much happening in it. So instead of, sorry. I just ignored the bottom note. To F. That was all the baby steps. It's a lot of baby steps and a lot of challenging things that you have to accomplish to be able to see what I'm looking at when I look at this, and then to be able to move it around. I'm viewing it all based on this shell voicing. Do you hear 5-1? That's like a pretty cool way to move through a 5-1 sound. Very unexpected, right? We're not going to find this. Yes, all of that could be found in the G half whole diminished scale. You could analyze it that way, but I, in a million years, would never come up with a pattern like that from the half whole diminished. I just wouldn't. There's too many moving voices. Things are going in opposite directions. I mean, it's too chaotic. And then the next baby step could be to break it apart and arpeggiate it. Talk about a line, man. Like, that's a riff. That is a riff that I would shed and memorize and try and get into my playing. What if we do skip up, come down? There it is. Circle fifths. This is all, I'm literally like real time. Like, I have not tried that arpeggiation of this yet. This is happening in real time. This is where my mind goes. These are my like instinctive processes. That's not right. Shell voicing, right? I'm looking at the shell voicing. Okay, so very last point, because I have to wrap up, but to go back to body and soul, the next step, once I get comfortable with something like that, might be to plug it into a tune, like force it, just jam this thing into place. B flat minor, E flat minor. Flat 9 to the 1. I'm doing it, I'm executing it slightly differently each time. I'm trying to voice lead in and out of it, but it's the same dyads I'm looking at. Stephen, yeah. Yeah, that's why to kind of settle things back down, I have to hang and meet up with someone at 2, so I have to wrap up now. We're a good bit over. It's like over 2.25 hours now. But understand, like, that's the importance of baby steps. Like, had I learned that riff 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, even 1 year ago, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing with it now. Learning to think from the fundamentals first, even though they seem so elementary, is what allows for real freedom, right? This is not, I mean, yes, it's a riff, but it's not like learning a riff from a transcription. I'm learning it from the fundamentals, and I understand how the fundamentals work. I have them in my fingers. I still work on them all the time. I work on basic major triads almost daily. Like, it's a lifelong thing for me. I'm not saying it has to be for you guys, but I certainly recommend it, because the more comfortable you are with them, the more freedom they allow for. But that freedom, that improvisational and compositional freedom, does come at a cost, and that cost is you kind of have to be willing to sit and be patient and let yourself be bored. Not 2 hours a day, but 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day, however much time you have, like however far you want to go. It's like a bow and arrow. However far you want that arrow to shoot forward, that's how far back you have to pull the string. It's one big paradox. I don't get why it works this way, but that's just how it works. If you want it to go 5 feet, you just pull the string a little bit and let it go, and it'll jump 5 feet. If you want to like shoot a target 100 feet, 100 yards away, you've got to like crank that thing back, right? I mean, that's the farther back you pull it, the more momentum gets built up, and then when you let it go, that's just what's going to happen. So understand the fundamentals, be able to learn to make music with them. Like, you don't need to spend 2 years working with this stuff to be applying it to making music. The clear, precise melody and the pretty harmony should start to happen relatively quickly within the first few months, if you're not a total beginner on the guitar and if you're staying disciplined. And that's why I often talk about, with my private students in Skype, the difference between the practice mindset and the play mindset. I don't sit in this mindset, this practice mindset, all the time, or even for long extended periods of time usually. The practice mindset is a very frustrating, infuriating, challenging place to be. I don't consider myself in the practice mindset unless I'm giving myself a little bit of a headache, because every moment that I'm in the practice mindset should be a moment of challenge. It should be a moment of I'm stuck in this box and I'm just pushing on it. I don't consider, if I'm playing something I'm already comfortable with and I'm not coming up with variations, then I'm just playing, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, we should be doing that. We should spend time having fun and enjoying what we know. That's the yin and the yang. That's the practice mindset and the play mindset. If I'm not spending time in the practice mindset and the play mindset, both and at different moments on the same day, then I don't really feel like I've truly accomplished anything, because to me, I want to be growing, but I also want to be enjoying who I am at any given moment musically. But yeah, so it takes a lot of baby steps with the fundamentals to get into those more stratospheric concepts, but they're just, hopefully you can see it's just like a ladder. Like, that's the process. You can borrow my ladder if you want it, but ultimately it's just about getting to know the fundamentals and just climbing. And if you're in here hanging with me, there's still a handful of people almost 2.5 hours in. Anyone who's in here is obviously, like, you guys are obviously on a ladder. You might not feel like it. You might not feel like you're progressing. But if you're hanging with me this long and talking about concepts this fundamental and elementary all the way up to application like this, you're on a ladder. Like, don't belittle yourself into thinking that you're not progressing. You are. You might not see it, but it's happening. just keep trusting the process, keep trusting the fundamentals. It goes back to Bach. One of our members, Jeremy, just posted a really cool video in our Facebook group. He took a piece that Bach wrote hundreds of years ago, analyzed it down to the basic triads to see what was happening in the music, came up with a chord progression with those triads, and then used melodic triads to compose a piece of jazz music. And it's pretty beautiful. Like, it sounds like a real piece of music. And it's based on stuff that was written hundreds of years ago, because Bach was using the same kinds of ideas that we are in terms of triad-based music. The primary difference is that we're taking it up into these tonalities where we allow for more upper structure stuff. But I do the same processes for lower structure triads too. They're great. I really have to run. Thank you guys so much for hanging all the way at the end of this. Quadratonics Level 2 is available if anybody wants it. There's a link to it in the underground. If anybody needs help with anything, you know where to find me. We're going to have another open office hours and another tonality class this month. So feel free to come back and hang again, ask more questions. The next tonality class is going to get more into the sections after digging deeper. Like, I want to talk more about the triad pairs, the bebop scale. A lot of that stuff, like the bebop scale ideas, are actually quite brand new for me. It's like within the last month or so, those ideas came to me of like, oh, look, we can just make bebop scales with triads. Like, why not? Who says we can't do it? So I hope this was helpful, and hope to see some of you guys again in the next couple open office hours, tonality classes. Hit me up if you need anything. Mark, you're welcome. John, you're welcome. Paul, glad you enjoyed this session. Thank you. Stephen, this has been fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Stephen. Sean, thanks everybody for hanging. Happy practicing. Talk to you guys soon.